What's going on, guys? Welcome to another episode of Eastern Current. It's been a little bit since I've recorded a podcast. I've actually had a baby since then, so things are changing around the Brock household, but it's been super exciting. I've been on the water a good bit, canceled a good number of trips just to spend some time at home with my wife and whatnot, but excited to get back out in the water. The weather's been really nice, and the fishing's been good. So if y'all are new to the podcast, go check out our Patreon page. There's some extra content. We do some giveaways and stuff on there. And I'm actually giving away some guide trips and some gear, some rods, and some tackle and whatnot on there in the next couple of days. And then go check out our Eastern Current Fishing Facebook group. It's where you can just connect with other listeners and download and kind of bounce fishing ideas and stories off of each other. So without me rambling too much more, as usual, let's actually we don't even have a guest today. It's just me and Cameron. We're going to be talking about topwater red fishing in the summertime. So I got you pulled up now, Cameron. What's up, brother?
Topic that never gets old.
It never gets old. It's just like speckled trout fishing. You can just beat it to death.
Yeah.
But there's so many little nuances about topwater too that are like, I feel like really good to touch on, and because to so many people it's a very intimidating lure to throw. You know, it's kind of like, oh, the fishing's really good, I'm going to throw a topwater. But I think for you and I, it's become more of like a search bait during certain conditions. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, no, definitely. I think it's a great search bait, especially in the summertime when the water's a little bit dirtier, so you're not, unless you're fishing somewhere with really clear water, generally fishing places with a little bit dirtier water.
Yeah.
So just having a bait that you can throw really far is always a good thing to have on the boat, because if you get a blow up, you know that you're at least in some sort of area with life.
Yeah, definitely.
But yeah, no, I mean, it's a great search bait. That in a popping cork, I think, are probably the best search baits for the summertime.
Yeah, I would agree. I think having that noise and, water movement, and with the popping cork and a topwater, you can play around with color a lot. So it's just really good for, searching for these fish. I always tell people, clients always ask, and it seems like with a topwater plug, 8 to 10 feet is kind of like your max range that fish might pick up on that topwater plug and come to eat it. So when I'm going down a bank, I feel like I'm always trying to make a cast like every 8 to 10 feet. You can go further away than that, but if you're hitting every 8 to 10 feet going down an edge, it's like you're definitely covering that water thoroughly. And I don't feel like I'm missing any fish around there, at least not any fish that would move on a topwater plug. What are kind of some of your tactics that you like to apply when topwater fishing? Where do you like to throw it? How do you like to retrieve? Well, let's just talk about what you're looking for as a good topwater area.
I like, generally speaking, kind of like bay areas that have oyster beds, that have a lot of grass points, which I think are one of the biggest tips someone ever gave me was, when you're throwing a topwater, you always want to throw it a little bit past a grass point and pull it across that point. I mean, it's a little tricky until you get your aim down with the topwater, or if there's a little bit of side wind or something like that, you can get caught up. And I still get caught up, a decent amount. So it happens. But throwing it across grass points is always a good thing to do, just because redfish will sit behind those depending on what the tide's doing. Even in a slack tide, I feel like they'll sit behind those just as ambush points.
Definitely.
And same thing with oyster beds. They'll be cruising oyster beds just because there's a little bit of cover. And then the other big thing that I look for is scalloped out areas in bays.
Definitely.
And what I like to see, I don't know if there's any truth to this.
Explain a scalloped out area real quick, just for people that might not know.
Yeah, sure. So if you're in a bay or if you're in the marsh and there's just imagine a big long line of grass.
Yep.
And then at one point in that big long line of grass, it cuts into a little bay. It could be a big bay, it could be a small bay, but just something that gives that line contour. Is always a good thing to look for, just because they tend to hang out there. Bait gets trapped in there as it's coming down that line. It'll swim into the bay, might get stuck in there for a little bit before moving on. And so I always look for fish movement in there, or blow ups or things of that nature. And that's another thing to think about. Like the other day, I was fishing in throwing top water, nothing, and get in trolling motoring down one bank, and the tide was pretty high, so I heard some fish like blowing up in the grass. Grass is too thick and shallow to get into.
Yeah.
But I started throwing my topwater all around, like where I heard those blow-ups, and lo and behold, there was like I think there was a school back there because I caught a handful.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would say scalloped out areas, points, oyster beds, and then the other thing that I like to look for, this is a tip you gave me a long time ago, is in the scalloped out areas if there's like not so much like just a straight edge into the water, but if there's a little broken up grass
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
in that scalloped out area, for whatever reason, those fish will kind of hold in that grass a little bit. So
It seems like when the tide gets higher, not all redfish, but redfish like to kind of find an area that they can lay up more so than cruise and hunt. They'll still eat, but they want to find an area out of the current a little bit, and those flooded grass areas break the current up really nicely. The bait kind of transitions in and out of there. So those are definitely key areas. One other thing I've noticed too is like you're talking about points and how important points are. There can be like a point could be just a little tiny bump on the bank, or it could be a big long point, and it seems like any of those points that create like a change in the way the water flows around an area, there's going to be oysters there. And so a bigger point, there's probably a higher percentage chance that there's a redfish on it. A smaller point, there's still a really good percentage chance that there's a redfish on it. But keying in on all those points and little creek mouths and guts. Another important thing too is like knowing where the depth change is, which is really hard to know unless you spend time out there. But you can also get on Google Earth and kind of check out your maps, whether you're in Florida or all the way up to Virginia. You can scroll around on the year that image was taken, and you can kind of see where the little deeper channels are. And as that tide starts to fall back out, fishing, where they might have been pushed up in a shallower flat, fishing that little edge with the topwater plug can be really effective with those fish sitting there. They'll fall out to that ditch first, and then as that bait starts falling off the flats, those fish will be sitting there waiting to eat those mullet coming off.
Yeah,
that's a little bit harder of an area to kind of like figure out. Points and creeks and scalloped banks are definitely the ticket. Yeah. But if you find that scenario, it can be
One thing I've noticed too is I feel like the places that I've caught fish on topwater in the past might not be the same spot the next year.
Yeah.
But in that general vicinity is usually pretty good fishing year after year. So I mean, it takes time. I don't think there's any like shortcut to learning like a good spot where redfish are, unless you have a really good friend that's going to be like, hey man, this is where the fish are.
Or a network like we've got.
Or a network. But yeah, I mean, it just takes time and a lot of patience and just plugging away for a long time. But once you find them, I would say generally speaking, you've found yourself a spot for a while.
Yeah, I would agree.
There was one other thing I was going to say. I can't remember right now. I'll probably come back up.
No worries. So let's talk a little bit about conditions. What do you consider to be prime conditions for topwater fishing for redfish?
I would say early in the morning definitely is the first bait I'm picking up is always going to be at topwater. Yeah. Once the sun gets high, you can still, if there's still, I still throw it if I'm getting blowups.
Yeah.
But I mean, there can be fish around in the middle of the day if you're on a high tide somewhere like I was talking about in a bay or something, and you caught some fish that morning and then the bite shuts off. It's probably just due to the time of day when they're just not. Do you feel like they get a little more lethargic in the middle of the day in the summer? Like they're just not as willing to go after a bait that's essentially running.
Definitely. And I think too a lot of times in the summer, like that sun gets up, it's bright, and if it's a calm day, it's usually like I feel like they can see that bait so well.
Yeah.
And maybe they won't eat it. But yeah, they definitely get a little more lethargic midday as far as like, cruising around actively hunting. It's hard. They'll still eat, and you can still get them to eat topwaters that time of day. But like you said, just listen and be aware of what's happening. Like if you were getting a lot of bites and it really slows down on you, change it up.
Yeah, so I would say early in the morning is probably the best time. I like when it's super glass calm. It's awesome just because it's cool to be out there when it's
Oh
that
yeah,
calm. But I almost feel like if there's a teeny bit of texture on the water, it's almost a little bit better.
yeah, I'd
I
agree.
don't know why. I don't know why that is, but just when it's dead calm, I feel like maybe the top water doesn't look as realistic, or something of that nature. But you can still have plenty of good days when it's very calm. But just a little bit of texture on the water is has always been the best days for me.
Yeah,
And if it's super windy, it's pretty tough.
yeah, super windy's tough, but I always tell people too. It's like don't be afraid to throw a top water in some bump because they'll definitely
Mm-mm.
still eat it.
Yeah.
Sometimes you just want to size up a little bit or throw a plug that's a little bit louder so this
Yeah.
fish can key on it. Obviously, when it's slick calm, those fish can see that plug from further away. Just know that
Hmm.
if you're saying if you're going down a bank throwing it every 8 to 10 feet when it's slick calm, you might want to throw it every 5 feet if it's a little bit bumpier. Tie on a larger plug like a one knocker or a full size spook or a full size skitter walk, and you'll be able to cover water a little better. I like fishing the small plugs a lot, but I'm not afraid to throw the big ones either. I honestly think trout eat bigger topwaters more so than slot redfish. Like I've caught
Hmm.
more little trout on big topwaters than I have caught even like decent sized redfish on big topwaters. And when I'm
Yeah.
talking about North Carolina inshore average fish size, so like a big fish being 30 inches. Not that they're afraid to eat that, but I think they're so sloppy they go for the little stuff because they know they can probably get it in their mouth.
Yeah. And one, since we're talking about size of topwaters, and one topwater that I started using a couple years ago, and maybe you or Ben told me to start using this, is this skitter walk,
Yeah.
gold mullet, I believe it's called.
Uh huh.
It's got like the good pitch, I think, like because I really like the she dog
You
because
are a
it's
big she
loud.
dog fan. A pink
Yeah, I
she
love
dog.
the pink she dog. It's a great topwater, but it's a little bit bigger than this one
Yeah.
as far as like how wide it is, and it might not be maybe it's the same length or a little bit longer, the she dog is. But yeah, like the class of fish so far this year for me have all been like on the lower slot,
Hmm.
surprisingly. And I was of course throwing the she dog a ton, like right in the beginning when topwater kind of started getting good, and wasn't getting a ton of bites, and started using that guy, and started getting way more bites.
Way more
So
bites.
yeah,
Yeah, it's like a slightly smaller profile than the she dog too. Like the width, like the head on that she
yeah,
dog is kind of wide.
yeah. It's a pretty big. I mean, pretty big plug. I feel like.
For sure. Yeah, it's not a small
Uh,
one.
but
Um,
in years past, in the spots that I like to fish, I've always had like most of the fish have been a little bit bigger than they are this year.
yeah.
So I don't know if that has anything to do with it, but they seem to like that one just fine.
Yeah, definitely. It's that skitter walk size is a really good size plug. I mean, I've probably caught more. I've been throwing spooks a lot the past 2 years, 3 years, but for the longest time, all I threw was that golden mullet skitter walk, and I
Hmm.
still that's my favorite color for the most part for redfish is that golden mullet or
Hmm.
really anything with an orange belly.
Yeah,
But
especially in that little bit dirtier water in the summer. I feel like it's just a great color.
oh, it's a great color. It's a really good color,
Yeah.
and that as it rolls over, it's got that gold on the side, and it gives it
Yeah,
that little bit of
exactly.
flash that it needs, but it's not too much. And then a black back. It's funny, like you'll see topwaters that have like really intricate painted like backs on them,
Hmm.
and it's just funny because it's totally for the fishermen. It's not for the fish because they never
Yeah,
see
yeah,
the
they
back
never
of the
see
plug.
it. Yeah,
So you might as well paint the back of all of them black or just leave it clear or something.
yeah. And
Um,
the other thing I remembered I was gonna say that I would look for is just bait. I mean, it's kind of crazy. Like you'll go in some areas that has zero bait, and it's like, man, this just feels dead.
yeah,
And you could definitely catch fish there, but I'd say your chances are lower.
definitely.
And but like 100 yards away on another bank, it's like loaded with bait.
Yep.
And that's probably the bank that I'm gonna focus more time on than the one that's just like slick, calm, nothing moving. You know.
Yeah, that's a big thing, and I listen to my gut a bunch. Like the other 2 days ago, I had a trip down in the Lower Cape Fear River, and 2 different times that day I ran into a spot, killed the motor, pulled into it, and pulled for like 2 minutes. And I was like, I just didn't feel it. The bait wasn't there. There was no birds on the banks.
Yeah,
hunting. That's another big thing. Like bait, if you see those white egrets on the banks, kind of wading along, for some reason, man, those are I'll usually catch a fish in the morning on topwater somewhere around where one of those egrets are. You'll catch them where they're not too, but if there's an egret around, I'm probably going to be able to pull a fish on topwater.
Yeah. I mean, they got to be eating some of the same stuff.
Yeah,
right?
definitely.
Like mud minnows, finger mullet.
Yeah.
I don't know if those things eat shrimp, but I imagine they would.
I'm sure they do. One thing that I think is important to go over here is the hooks on a topwater plug. And so there's some really, you can fish, so it's all the spook plugs, the skitterwalk plugs, and the mirror lure plugs all have good hooks on them. The mirror lure hooks are usually the strongest hooks in my opinion. I don't love the Rapala skitterwalk hooks, honestly. Mm-hmm. They rust out pretty easily, and they're just not my favorite hooks. But the mirror lure hooks are quality hooks. So like if you want to go throw that to if you're red fishing and some big jacks pop up and you throw it to a big jack, or big bull, you're fishing for big bull redfish, those hooks are going to hold up for you. Those skitterwalk hooks can hold up for you, but you're going to bend them out a little bit sooner. And then I covered the Rapala, and then the spooks. A lot of the spook hooks are solid hooks as well. One thing I do to all my plugs, if I'm just going to be throwing them for speckled trout and slot size redfish, is I change them out and I change the split rings out. But I change the hooks out to owner stinger trebles, and size varies depending upon the plug. If you have any questions about like what size hooks I like, I don't want to go all into it, but just message us on or Facebook or YouTube or on the podcast platforms, and I can go into that a little bit more. But changing to these stinger hooks, they're just extremely sharp. They're very light wire, so you can certainly bend them out on large fish. But I mean, I've caught 30-inch fish on these hooks. You just want to fish a light tipped rod, and we'll go into that here in just a second. But these hooks are so sticky that I've hooked so many fish, especially trout, on the side of the face. Like they'll come up and slap at it and not really even get it in their mouth, but these hooks will hang them and you'll catch fish that you wouldn't normally have. So that's the owner stinger hook. That's not like a sponsored plug or anything. I just, Ben Chesney at Intercoastal Angler turned me onto these hooks, and I really like them. I don't like them for bigger fish, like heavier redfish, or if I'm going to be throwing it to anything that pulls harder. But for the slot size redfish and down and speckled trout and down, they're great hooks. One other thing that I think is really important to talk about with topwater fishing is what kind of rod to throw a topwater plug on. And so it really has a lot to do with, one, getting working that plug, the cadence you want to be able to work it, but two, with treble hooks, you really, 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 really need a soft tipped rod to give a lot of play to that fish when you're fighting it, because a treble hook is way easier to pull out than a single J hook. So I'm fishing a light tipped rod, one, because I like the way I can work a plug with it. I can do give very little amount of effort and have that plug walking nicely. But two, if that fish comes up and eats the plug and he's got it hooked kind of weird like this, and he's turning his head, he's got all these leverage points to pop these hooks out. And so having a lot of give from that soft rod tip is key. And I mention them a lot, but Tactical Bass, and if you go in and watch some of their YouTube videos talking about jerk baits or top waters or any of that stuff for bass, they'll drive home the same points. And I like to put a lot of stock in what the bass fishing guys say, because a lot of what we're doing here in the saltwater world and redfish and all that is coming from, the new bait pops up, you look, and it's probably a bait that's the bass guys have been fishing for a couple of years. And so soft tip rods, if you're taking your topwater fishing seriously, don't go tie a topwater onto like a medium heavy or medium fast. Get a medium light rod and go to town with the fish. See if you can catch them. I'm stumbling through my words. I didn't get much sleep last night with the baby. So.
No, I think that's a super important. Is the play. And you'll still lose fish, I promise you.
Oh yeah.
You'll lose less fish.
Yeah, with fishing with clients too, that's another reason I've loved these stinger hooks, is because those fish, it's like, all right, if I miss a fish, it sucks, I hate it, but it's not as painful as like, all right, I go out, it might be a slow morning, and we had 4 fish eat the topwater all morning. I want those 4 fish to get stuck and come to the boat. I don't want to be like, oh, remember those blow-ups that we had, those 4 sick blow-ups? And so fishing those hooks that you rely on, and don't be lazy. Sometimes I'm often lazy with my hooks on my plugs. If they get nasty and they get rusty, keep extra ones on your boat with some split ring pliers and change them out. If you bend them out or break a hook off, put another treble on. If you're okay with just getting the blow up and maybe not getting the fish to the boat, that's fine. But stay on top of your hooks. Keep a file on the boat and file the tips down and keep them sharp. The hooks are cheap, and if you only get to fish, once a month, two or three times a month, you want to make everything count. You want to make every bite count, and you want to make sure those fish aren't pulling off or not getting hooked. So, what rods are you enjoying to fish your topwaters on?
I like like you said, medium light.
Cool.
I think it's like a 7.2 or something like that.
Is it that Shimano? Are you fishing that Shimano GLX? Is
no,
that what it is?
I have that for trout, which is a phenomenal rod for that type of stuff, because you can really launch like super light baits as well.
Yeah.
But you also have a ton of give in the tip, so it's nice for the soft mouth.
Definitely.
Fish, but I feel like that rod is a little bit light on the butt end to really like pump a good sized drum. So I use those HMXs.
Gotcha.
Which I think have been great rods for.
Is that a medium light as well? You said HMX.
Yeah.
Cool.
Great rods for just pretty much anything in the summertime. I feel like they are great for redfish. They're good for fishing for sheep's head, and even in the spring they hold up really well on the false albacore too. So,
yeah, definitely.
Good all around.
Are you fishing a 3000?
Mm-hmm. Yep, I use a 3000 on all of those rods.
Cool. 15-pound braid.
15-pound braid. God, I can't remember the type of braid that they've been putting on it recently.
Power Pro, super slick.
Power Pro super slick.
Okay.
And that stuff.
It's great.
It is awesome.
It's so awesome. It does not win not nearly as much as spider wire, man. I cannot tell you how much I hate spider wire. I've got it on so many reels right now. I've been taking it back off and putting super slick back on it. So.
And then the reels that I've been using are those Shimano makes them the what are they called?
Spiros.
Spiros.
Yeah, that's what I thought you had.
Yeah. And those have been really awesome too. I mean, there's a lot of times your win knot doesn't always come from the type of line you're using, but your reel and your rod,
Yeah.
And yeah, just very, very, very few win knots, which has been a really nice change from some of the equipment I've used in the past.
Yeah, one thing that I've learned is a win knot oftentimes will come from if your line is traveling off your spool at a faster rate than it can go through the guides or the eyes of your guides. Mm-hmm. And so that's why playing around with the reel type and rod that you like is important. Like I had some pin conflict reels, and I was throwing them on the Fenwick Elite Techs, and they didn't win knot as much. And I threw them on some G Loomis rods, and it was like win knot every 10 casts. And I don't know why. I mean, same exact reels, line was on them fine. I was throwing them fine on Elite Techs, but so I was like, it's got to be the way that the line is coming off this spool and traveling through these eyes. I mean, that's the only thing. And another big thing with topwater that's important is or anything is, if you have some slack right when your bait lands on the water, give that line some tension when your first couple of reels. That way it's tight on the spool, because oftentimes, you'll just start reeling, it'll put a little slack in there, and then when you throw it, that'll, will travel out in a little bit of a loop, hit that first eye and kind of slow it down and tangle it up, and then you got a win knot coming out. So
yeah. And one thing I had to learn the hard way is I oftentimes will tie on fluorocarbon to the end of my braid for topwaters, and I feel like it probably happens more with topwaters just because you're launching them really hard. But I tie my leader a little bit shorter than I would on like a jig head or something like that. Yeah. Just because when I do a double uni from the fluorocarbon to the braid. Yeah. And if I make it like super long, and that is traveling through the guides really fast, that knot, I feel like I get more wind knots. So if I can cast every time without having to reel that knot up into the guides, so I just make it a little bit shorter, it tends to help out with that.
Yeah, you got to think the speed that plug's traveling. I don't know, but it's probably fast. I mean, I would be willing to bet 50, 60 miles an hour when that plug's leaving your rod tip going out. And if that knot catches one of those eyes just a little bit and slows that little section of line down, that braid's is already coming off the spool fast, so it's gonna meet up to the knot a little bit, and I think that's where that wind knot comes. I've been thinking a lot about wind knots lately because that stupid spider wire is tangling so much.
Dude, someone, our buddy Jeff gave me a tip on wind knots one time that has saved me so many times from having to retie, and I don't know why it works, but it works like 70% of the time. If you get a wind knot, and it's not like a crazy one, like no way I'm ever gonna get this untied, but it looks like somewhat doable to get untied. There's usually one big loop in your knot. Find the biggest loop and just start pulling it apart, and a lot of times the whole wind knot will just come undone.
That's good. That's a good tip right there.
I don't know why, but it works.
So I'm starting to be better about trying to undo wind knots, but usually I'm the guy that just grabs either side and prays and pulls, and then sometimes it comes undone, sometimes it's stuck. But you can almost always get them undone if you take the time. But I always say if I think it's going to take me more than 3 minutes to undo a wind knot, it's not worth it. It takes me about a minute and a half to tie a knot, to tie everything back on, and so not a single knot, but a couple knots. I'm not that bad at tying knots.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about two more things. One, color of topwater plugs, and two, just the different shapes and kind of what you like, what we both like to fish. So let's just share your favorite 3 colors of plug that you like to fish.
I would say orange and gold, like this one, and then pink, and either white and silver.
Gotcha.
Probably more so white and silver and in cleaner water, but it also would work in dirty water just because white's one of those colors that I feel like can go in between.
Yeah, it's a good crossover color.
And then pink in dirty water, and I feel like pink works pretty good in clean water too, but maybe not as well as white. And then definitely the gold and orange and more brackish kind of dirty brown.
Yeah, a little
water.
tainted, not tainted, tinted.
Tinted,
not tainted.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've been painting up this plug color. They're over there. I'm not going to go grab them. But I saw it. It's called Cransom. It was like a limited edition Paul Brown lure mixed with, I think Down South Lures was making that color as well. But it's like a black back with purple sides, silver belly, and then a couple black spots down the side of it. And they look sick. They look really good. I'm excited to fish those. But I would say anything with a chartreuse plug, a golden mullet color plug. This is one that I've painted here. And then anything with chartreuse or orange on the belly. Those are kind of my go-to colors unless I'm playing around a lot. The only time I really play around a lot with topwater color is trout fishing. I'll play around with it a little bit more because you can a lot of times see those fish come up and they're like kind of following your plug as you twitch it and sitting underneath it. And knowing what to change to can be pretty key. But don't get complacent. Don't be afraid to trade. If you get 2 or 3 blow-ups and they're not absolutely choking it, then maybe change it up to another color or a different style plug. I'm going to share with y'all my thoughts on the different plugs real quick. So the only difference is the way that the plugs walk and the pitch, the sound of the plugs, and they're all walk the dog lures that we're talking about today. There's obviously poppers and whopper ploppers and other stuff, but I think the most effective, time tested plug for a redfish is a walk the dog plug. And so your she dogs and your spook juniors, I think, are kind of the loudest two, like kind of highest pitch plugs in the water. And then you've got the skitter walks that are a little bit more dull, and you've got the one knockers and the other mirror lures. Top dog.
Top dog is like a very kind of like deep sounder.
Yeah. So I like I tend to like the higher pitch plugs when it's a little bit bumpier. The water's a little bit nastier. The conditions are maybe a little bit tougher for that fish to key in on the plug. And then when it's calmer, I like those deeper, those deeper, droning noises from the plug. And the other big thing to think about is like, the cadence of how that plug is walking is pretty important. And why don't you take that over real quick, like a retrieve with the topwater plug, no matter what you're throwing, how are we retrieving this plug back to the boat?
Yeah, I think it it varies. It definitely varies, and it's almost just dependent on the fish mood, if that makes any sense. Like,
yeah, no, definitely.
I'll always, if I'm not having, like, I have one rhythm that I do most of the time, and then if that's not working, I'll start trying different rhythms. And I feel like there's probably 3 different rhythms. Generally speaking, there's like the slow, like dum, 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 and then there's the medium one, and then there's the really like a fast one. And just depending on what's been getting the most bites is generally the rhythm that I'll go to. And for a while, I didn't never use like a fast rhythm that much until a couple years ago, when it was like late spring, and there was like a school of fish in this hole, and we were throwing topwaters to them, because every time I would do my normal cadence, just the medium cadence, they would come up, and you could see them come up, follow it, and then go back down. I'm like, dude, what the heck? And I had thrown one really far away and was just like, oh man, that's a bad cast. And I just started ripping it in. And my buddy who was on the tower was like, holy crap, man, you got like 5 fish chasing it right now. And I was like, huh. And so then I threw it out to where I knew the fish were and did it really fast, and they started crushing it.
That's awesome.
So
it was like that, triggering that response of, aggression.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't know. I think you just got to test it out and throw a bunch of different, or do a bunch of different rhythms when you're fishing, and then just figure out what you think the fish like and start sticking with that.
Yeah, definitely. I think the one more important thing to touch on here before we finish with this Topwater podcast is kind of, if you're going to go out and buy some plugs, how do these different plugs work? And so I kind of look at it as tight walking plugs and like looser walking plugs. And not that you can't do it all with each of them, but some of them are easier to do, those certain retrieves. And so there's a skidder V, which is like a V bottomed, like it's almost like a V hole on a boat, skidder walk. That bait you can walk really, really tight, and it actually walks pretty well in current. The only issue with it is sometimes if it's like some bumpy current, that the nose is going to dive under a little bit. But that skidder V, you can walk really tight. You can almost have it cut straight back and forth, left to right. A lot of these spook baits, they're just the long barrel shaped baits, you can walk those really tight. And then kind of there's a lot more angle change on the belly of a mirror lure plug or a skidder walk. And those you kind of can get that looser walk, they're all great, retrieves. It's just kind of a matter of figuring out what those fish want. And again, this could be like so much information on how to retrieve a topwater, but that's what we're here for. We're here to break down, how to target these fish, different lures to throw to them, and try to help you, think at the next level and hopefully catch some more fish. So think about that when you're walking those plugs. If the fish are eating it really, they want it really fast, like Cameron's talking about, something with a looser walk that's going to, still walk pretty well, fast is good. Maybe a spook or a skidder V or something like that isn't going to be the best if you're trying to retrieve it really, really fast. When I'm walking it tight, I like to, slow it down a little bit so it's really cutting side to side. And when I'm walking it fast, I want that, those loose just clack, 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 clack across the top of the water. And it seems like the fish will key in on it. Was there anything else you want to share real quick before we shut this one down?
I don't think so. I mean, I've said this before, but you just want to make sure that when you tie on a topwater, you do a knot that gives like a loop knot.
Definitely.
Just because it needs that give in the knot to be able to move back and forth. And that's really it. I mean, if you want the walk the dog action, I feel like you have to have that knot in there.
Yeah, it definitely helps so much. It gives it that play and that ability to slide back and forth.
Yep.
Well, cool. Well, that's our Topwater Redfish podcast there, guys. Cameron, it's fun as always. We hope that gave you all some stuff to think about, and maybe try some new plugs, try some new colors, try some new areas. Let us know how y'all do. If you have any more Topwater questions, feel free to hit us up on Facebook, on YouTube, on Instagram, anywhere, and then we'll be happy to answer them. Just a reminder, if you are listening to this as a podcast, please click that subscribe button there on the podcast platforms, and go leave us a 5-star rating if you think we're 5-star. If you're on YouTube, definitely subscribe to the channel, and we will see y'all in the next video. Later.